Thank you so much for being here. Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Foundation. Their website is nrtw.org, nrtw.org. Mark, thanks for coming on.
Stacy, good to be with you again. It's not like you lack for news or talking points, right? You got plenty of things to talk about.
Oh, my gosh. If you ever feel tired, you know, you just pick your phone up and it's going bling, bling with the notifications, Twitter trends, everything you could think of. And that's why you're here tonight because, you know, I don't know about you, but I just want a cup of coffee. I don't want drama from Starbucks. I don't want politics from them. I don't want them interfering in, like, everyday life. I just want them to stop burning the beans and make good coffee. And the Frappuccinos also. Just make good stuff. So tell us what's going on with them now.
Well, first of all, one of the great enjoyments I have in life is going into a Starbucks and ordering a medium dark roast coffee. It confuses everyone, and you know, it's not you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to use those terms like venti. I don't even know what the terms are. I've got 5 daughters that love Starbucks, so they're big Starbucks fans, and they've got the apps on their phone and the little buttons they push to. They don't use cash anymore or anything. But you know, it's a big story, Stacy, and it's a story that involves organized labor, and it involves unionization. And the story, if you were following, you know, the New York Times and NPR and MSNBC and Washington Post and Bloomberg and CNN and Reuters, you would think that this is the most aggressive union organizing drive in the history of the labor movement. And the headlines kind of indicate that, but the rest of the story is that workers at Starbucks, while they are deciding voluntarily and hopefully in all cases to unionize and have votes, and they can vote privately if they want to be represented by a union, the law protects that right. But what we find out about the Starbucks kind of organizing drive is that first and foremost, workers that had voted to unionize over a year ago are now coming back, and they want to get out of the union. They want to decertify the union. In fact, we're now representing Starbucks employees at a Manhattan-based roastery that I guess they actually serve coffee too. But they decided that the so-called representation they were promised by the union in the early days of the organizing campaign in New York State, where it kind of all started, they're deciding they want to get out. And another unit up in Buffalo and a unit up in Rochester are trying to get out. And one of the secrets that came out of all this is that basically when this whole thing started, it was a union agent, a Service Employees International union agent who was hired by the union, paid by the union, to get a job at the first Starbucks that unionized and agitate and create an environment where, you know, there was controversy and it was an adversarial relationship, and so those baristas started the union drive there. It was a paid employee, but now they're trying to get out. And the idea that the point that I made earlier about this, you know, kind of being a national trend, when you think about it, Stacy, and this may shock you a little bit, but maybe it won't because these guys are on every street corner. But there's 15,900 Starbucks stores in the United States, and about 9,200 of them are owned by the company. Those are the company-owned stores. And basically, at this point, we've had almost just over 400 elections at Starbucks, and only 300 of them have decided to unionize. 62 of those elections have ended up in losses where workers voted no. 33 of those petitions were withdrawn because the union didn't think they had the votes to win. And now we've got 3 decertifications where people are trying to get out of the union. And so, notwithstanding the mainstream media, or well, I don't know if we call them that, the corporate media, you know, the narrative there, what this is workers looking at unionization and deciding that it may not necessarily be the best thing for them, and now we've got workers trying to get out of the union that was being touted as, you know, kind of the salvation of the baristas across the country.
They had pretty rich benefits and, you know, perks to begin with, which is why I really found it interesting that they would even, like, I can imagine being at Starbucks, having my tuition paid for, having that great hourly rate. I mean, they have some pretty delicious perks and benefits there. And so I can imagine telling someone who said, you know, what we really need to do is unionize. And I'd say, well, why don't you go unionize somewhere else? Because here at Starbucks, we're already getting the best of everything. But they didn't. They actually fell for the okey doke.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that why it's attracted to the unions, Stacy, is because in large sense, this is I won't say they're necessarily immediately transitory jobs, but generally these are kind of entry-level positions, and there are some people obviously that stay there for a while and do great work and enjoy their work, but for the unions, this is a really interesting dynamic. It's kind of like the quick-serve restaurants, like the McDonald's and the Wendy's, and you probably remember those battles over unionizing those stores around the country.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happens in the development of a program like this, the unions look at it and they say, well, look, there may be anywhere from 75 to 100% employee turnover in 1 year at a store like this. And so if we can get in there and we can get, represent, quote unquote, the employees, we can get initiation fees from all the workers and we can get union dues for a year or 6 months or 12 months or 24 months or whatever. And then they move on. They don't vest in the pension program. They don't require a great deal of service by union officials. And then when the next employee is hired up, that revenue stream creates itself all over again. It used to be in the industrial age of the union movement, when you think about kind of the origins in the 1930s, 1940s, the factory down the street, your grandfather worked there, your father worked there, and you worked there. And it was this legacy where you spent your career at the factory or the company or whatever it might be. I don't think the same thing is true for this generation. Certainly, I'm kind of a dinosaur, Stacy, because I've been doing the same thing for 36 years, so I'm kind of the old school. But I think the studies show now that someone that graduates from college over the last 5 years will have 7 or 8 or 9 different careers through their lifetime. So the unions are capitalizing on that kind of transition and that turnover, and the best place to do that is right here at these kind of entry-level jobs. And so from a revenue standpoint, it makes pretty good sense for the unions to try to organize workplaces like this.
So it's a moneymaker for them, but it isn't exactly it doesn't help the employees. Because what have they gotten out of, like for these ones that are voting to decertify now, what did they get out of unionizing? Anything?
Well, not really. There's not a contract yet at any of these places. They're still negotiating. And one of the things that the media won't talk about either is the fact that the union is really being the one that's standing up and not wanting to bargain and not wanting to go into bargaining sessions. Because what they want is they want Zoom sessions, and Starbucks says, no, we want to do face-to-face negotiations because we don't want our managers exposed out there. And we certainly want the kind of conversation that we're having to be in a controlled environment as opposed to out there in the ether. And so I think there have been something like, 300 or more than 300 bargaining units or bargaining sessions scheduled, and I think the union has only showed up for like 23% of those or something, and there's a real, kind of the union won't sit down and negotiate with Starbucks at a particular workplace that's voted for unionization. So at this point, they really haven't gotten anything, although these workers now, because they voted for the union says, okay, now you're a member of ours, so let's go ahead and start paying dues and start paying initiation fees, and we'll go to work for you. But nothing is at this point,
Con artist. That's a con artist. Hey, pay me up front for work I'm going to do for you, and then once you start to pay them, they don't do any work. And you're like, well, but I haven't gotten anything. When do you begin? You don't worry about that. I'm not subject to your arbitrary timelines. Don't, and on it goes. And you keep waiting for something to materialize that you're paying for, these unions, and you get nothing. Con job. That's what that is.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and to that point, Stacy, one of the things that's happened over the last year or so is that these units that have actually voted for unionization, and allegedly there's bargaining going on, Starbucks decided, because of the inflation and for other demands for getting people to come into stores, because it's not easy to find workers these days in any business for that matter, and so they tried to raise wages for the stores that they own that weren't unionized yet, because if they would have tried to raise wages for workers that were in union elections, that would be an unfair labor practice charge. The labor law says you can't offer an increase in pay while the union is trying to organize your workers, because otherwise that would be, you would be putting your finger on the scale about what they would say. You'd say, look, we're going to give you a pay raise. Well, if you're negotiating a contract or if you're under a union organizing campaign, then if you make that additional payment to those employees, they can't, it'd be an unfair labor practice against the employer for trying to increase their wages. Now, the labor unions say, well, we signed an agreement that said they could go ahead and raise everybody's wages during the process of unionization, but even then, under the National Labor Relations Act, that's illegal. You can't provide additional inducements to quote unquote, convince someone not to vote for a union. And, you know, oftentimes union officials will make that claim that the employer tried to raise wages or give new benefits, and that was obviously an act on their part to basically stop us from getting workers to vote for us. So in this case, the workers that had voted for unionization were kind of left on the sidelines when it came to increased pay during the period of COVID and trying to attract new workers, which you have to do. You have to incentivize people to come to work, unfortunately, because the government pays pretty well, you know, for sitting at home.
My gosh. So you're saying, we have to reiterate this because as you're driving and listening to Mark talk about this, my good friends in Sirius XM land, you have to be thinking that you haven't heard of anyone as inept as these Starbucks workers because they unionize themselves out of a pay raise. So the employees who do not have a union were able to realize pay increases, and the unionized employees, due to labor relations law, like they couldn't get around it. Starbucks, the company, could not get around not giving them the raise. And so they ended up not getting it because they were trying to unionize so that they could get better pay and benefits.
Yeah. That's the long and short of it. And that happened, interestingly enough, Stacy, that's been happening in several unionized workplaces over the last couple of years because as you have a contract, let's say you have a 3-year contract or a 4-year contract or a 5-year contract, it's very specific about what has to happen in implementing that contract over the period of time. So if you're a non-union company and after COVID, coming out of COVID, in order to attract more workers, you say, okay, I'm going to increase pay and you're going to get this much and you're going to get that much. If you're in a unionized situation, it's very difficult to reopen the contract to negotiate new wages in the middle of a contract. That usually happens at the end. So in some cases, in lots of cases, not only at Starbucks, where is a good case study, but in other organized union workplaces, that same phenomena occurred because the employer couldn't increase wages because of the contract and the stipulations of the contract and the rigidity of the contract as it relates to, okay, Stacy, you've been here another year, so you get a 2% raise, or you've been here another 2 years, so you get a 4% raise, or whatever it was the contract stipulates. When Joe Biden's spending and government spending has increased inflation to 8%. I mean, real wages were going down and still are, Stacy. And not to get into too much economics here, I know you can do that. You can do that in your sleep, but that's not the topic today. But it's been an interesting run for unionized workers over the last 2 years, with a president who said he wanted to be the most pro-union president in American history. He's actually hurt workers all across the country.
Yeah, and he hit the union workers first. Well, let's not forget, the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline was probably the biggest blow to unionized workers that we'd seen in quite some time. And I'm talking about a concerted effort, an intentional act. A lot of things that happen in unionized workplaces, it's an employer goes out of business in a small town and the workers are unionized, and so there's just that huge impact, but it's not intentional. But the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline was his first thunderous blow against unionized workers, and he's been hitting them hard ever since.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you're an operating engineer working on the Keystone Pipeline, which was a union-only job, it was a project labor agreement, union labor only, and you're out there making a good living and excited about the prospects of being on the, building the pipeline and being involved in that process for another year or 2 or 3, and you watch the election process in 2020, you see Joe Biden say, if I'm elected, we're going to shut that Keystone Pipeline down. And then, to add insult to injury, you see your union, the operating engineers union, give maximum contributions to Joe Biden. And to your point, Stacy, the first week while he's on the job, what does he do? He shuts it down and puts all of those union workers on the unemployment line. Same thing with the roughnecks in the oil field. Same thing, and it was mostly unionized people that basically were put out of work by not granting new leases and shutting down the oil and gas industry and the exploration on federal lands. I mean, his actions have been devastating to rank and file union members across the country.
It's been rough. I mean, and they're always saying how Republicans are so terrible to unionized workers, are so terrible to labor, organized labor. Republicans hate organized labor. I don't know that we can say, honestly, that we've ever seen a Republican president hit union workers like this repetitively over and over and over again. I don't think we can say that.
I think you're right, and one of the reasons is because oftentimes Republicans lack the courage and fortitude to stand up for individual freedom and liberty when it comes to collectivist rights that are written into federal labor policy. But if you look at NAFTA, who signed the NAFTA legislation? That would be Democrat Bill Clinton. You know, when you talk to union officials, even though they had to keep their mouth shut and you know, close their eyes and plug their ears because Clinton's the one that quote unquote devastated the union jobs in industrial America by signing NAFTA. I mean, and then you look at Joe Biden and the things that he's done, and it's just, it doesn't make any sense. You know, Ronald Reagan, they blame Ronald Reagan for, you know, starting the union busting movement by firing the air traffic controllers. But the federal law, Stacy, you know this, the federal law said that you cannot strike against the federal government. If you do, you will be fired. And what Reagan did said, look, we'll give you 24 hours to get back on the job. We want to continue to negotiate. They didn't, and he exercised his authority and enforced the law that said those workers were fired. Somehow, you know, that was the beginning, and that's how the Republicans get this black eye, quote unquote, finger quotes, and all else that I can do to be satirical over the radio. But it's amazing. You know, Republicans tend to stand up like Donald Trump. I mean, think of Donald Trump's administration. I mean, he put more people to work. He gave us energy independence, which helped union jobs. He brought manufacturing back to the shores of the United States of America, which unions can gladly go out and try to organize the workers if they think they can get them. More jobs means more opportunities for union organizers. But yet, under this administration, we're seeing exactly the opposite, notwithstanding the rhetoric that comes out of the big media and Joe Biden's mouth about, oh, yeah, I'm labor's guy. You own me, he says to the Electrical Workers Union. You own me. Well, the ownership model is not working very well for the unions, and it's working really well for big labor union bosses, not working so well for rank and file workers.
Yeah, everywhere you look, like the Randy Weingartens are making out like big dogs. AFT union chick, she's been there the longest and doing the best. And if you look out into the public sector, the big union bosses always do well, and the people who work for them always do well. But the rank and file who pay the dues, who never have a say in where the money goes to after it leaves their paycheck, they're the ones who are getting hit with these cancellations by Democrat politicians. They were hurt during the lockdowns, and now they're hurt, especially these Starbucks workers. They were really duped. And I would say I feel sorry for them, Mark, but I don't, because they weren't working for a place where they were treated like, you know, sweatshop employees. They were working for a company where the guy literally spearheaded the $15 an hour movement. Before it was cool, Starbucks was like, we'll pay $15 an hour. We make a lot of money selling coffee. We're going to do it. And he's always been ahead of the curve when it comes to providing a benefit of some sort. He's never shied away from giving these people stuff. You know, they're his employees. He feels responsible for them. That's actually a good employer. They shot themselves in the foot, and I can't feel sorry for them.
Yeah, you know, Bernie Sanders, you know, threatened to subpoena Howard Schultz to come to the Senate hearing and basically berate him for being a union buster. But you look at that story, the Starbucks story, and look at Howard Schultz, and you know the fact that Bernie Sanders gets up there and points his finger at a guy that grew up in tenements and built a business. I mean, you know, and the accusation is, well, he's a billionaire. Yeah, that's the worst thing you can ever be in a country based on, you know, initiative and you know, the grand experiment and the American dream. I mean, the worst thing you can do is build a company that employs literally hundreds of thousands of people and builds a business that people like and provides a product. Well, some people like the product. Well, I guess a lot of people. Maybe Stacy does like the product, but
no, I drink it. I mean, I was just talking about not drinking it anymore yesterday, Mark, because I was like, look at all the different woke things they're up to. And I, you know, I used to drink Dunkin' in protest, and then our daughter went off to college, and she loves Starbucks, and so in order to spend time with her, you know, without having to go to two separate places, we go get the Starbucks coffee, and I drink it because, you know, parenting comes first, kids come first. But, geez, they just won't leave me alone. Like, I just want to drink it and not have to worry about their politics, and they just won't stop.
Yeah. My daughters are the same way, Stacy. The vibe at Dunkin's just not quite the same as the vibe at Starbucks. To use a new word, you know, I'm not supposed to, I'm too old to use words like that.
Me
but
too.
They use it,
Me too. Vibe, yeah. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
A vibe.
Yeah. Yeah. But the important thing is, look, if there's other workers out there that are listening, you know, we want to help. We want to help them exercise their rights. We're not interested in discouraging anyone from joining a union or standing in the way of them joining if they want to do so voluntarily. But if they want to get out, like these workers and knew about this, and we're helping the DCERT in that roastery in Chelsea and down in Manhattan, The worker there, look, they're forcing us to pay dues. We can speak for ourselves. These are the reasons why, after watching it for a year, in this case 16 months, I believe it is, nothing's happened. And so they want to kind of start the talk again with their managers, and it's really difficult to do that when the union's in the way. You really can't have a conversation, with your supervisors and other people about workplace rights. The unions will say, well, absolutely you can talk, but we have to be there and we have to lead it, and you can't do anything for any employees that we don't approve of or is not, quote, part of the contract. So labor policy doesn't work for individuals. It works for collectives, and union officials love monopolies and they love collectives. And the moment they get the privilege or the power to represent, quote unquote, represent workers, they use it and they abuse it oftentimes, and that's unfortunate.
And the way to avoid it is, if you want to be in a union, first find out about the process. Find out what's involved. Find out what you won't be allowed to do and what you will be allowed to do during the negotiation. Then, if it's still interesting to you, if you still feel like that's something you want to do, make sure you have the votes, go in, and then expect that, sometimes circumstances will not go in your favor, such as what's happening with the Starbucks people. They're literally not getting raises, some of them, because they're working on being unionized. And now they've changed their minds, and thank God you're there to help them, because it feels like if it wasn't for Mark Mix and Right to Work, these people would be up a creek without a paddle, because they definitely sent themselves up the creek. They did.
Yeah, and navigating labor policy once you're in a union, trying to get out, is very, very difficult. It's amazing how Congress back in the 1930s created this power for union officials, for private organizations. Stacy, it's important we remember that these are quote private businesses that have this power granted by the government to compel people to accept their representation even though they voted against them, compel them to pay dues or fees in order to get or keep a job, and then use that power in a way that ends up like the United Auto Workers Union in Detroit, where 12 of their top executives were in jail or are in jail right now for stealing money of rank-and-file workers because those workers had no other choice or no alternative. They had to pay, otherwise they lose their jobs. That type of coercion, that type of compulsion leads to corruption. We know that. We see it. And not to say there's not corruption on the other side of the aisle with big business. There certainly is. But the bottom line is this, big business can't force anyone like you. They can't force you to buy Starbucks. You have alternatives. You can go to Dunkin', and your daughter can convince you to go back to Starbucks, but you have the decision to go or not go. The labor policy in America is not like that. It has compulsion. It has force. It has monopoly implications. And oftentimes, to your point, Stacy, people have their eyes closed going in, and they get a big surprise when all of a sudden they wake up and the union says, "Hey, congratulations, we're now speaking for you, we're now talking for you, we're now making decisions for you."
Hi, have you ever heard of us? We're your best friends. We're taking your money and we're doing whatever we want with it. And also, you can't get a raise unless we say so. Is your boss offering you a raise? Well, he has to come talk to us first. I mean, it just sounds like something out of a nightmare, but that's exactly what they're experiencing. So it's like anything else. Unfortunately, things are never as easy as they're purported to be. Unfortunately, people don't always stand up and live up to what they've promised to do, and you have to be cognizant that that's a possibility. And even in the face of disappointment, if you want things to turn out well for yourself, you have to stay above board on your end, even when things like this are happening. I still don't feel sorry for them, but at least it's a good lesson. It's a great way to grow up and become strong mentally and develop some fortitude for these Starbucks workers. They probably won't be as easily duped in the future. Mark Mix, it's always a pleasure to have you here with us on the show, especially when you are bringing us this is a story you could not a creative writer couldn't have thought this one up and presented it any better than what you've done.
Well, Stacy, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your service, and thank you for standing up for America and standing up for liberty and freedom. I mean, it's getting more difficult to hear a message like this out there, but I know you're going to keep doing it. You do it day in and day out, and I thank you for that, and it's great, and it's a privilege to be on with you this evening, so thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, you're the president of the National Right to Work Foundation. It's at Right to Work on Twitter, and you can also go to their website and find out more.